In this lecture, we're going to be talking about the fact that we forget things and why this happens. A lot of times we're trying to remember things, whether it's on the tip of our tongue, whether we're in an exam and we're trying to remember some information and we just can't remember it, whether we meet someone, acquire their name, then meet them again a few days later, only to see that we don't actually remember their names anymore. So why does this phenomena happen? So there are some common and basic issues that causes this failure in retrieval or failure in storage. Whatever it is, it's usually related to one of these four systems. First off, retrieval failure. We have some kind of information that we stored, but we're having a hard time retrieving the information. The second factor is external or internal interference. There might be some external factors that made you forget, or some internal factors that interfered in the process. Now, this interference can happen in any of the stages of the memory system. It can happen when we're trying to acquire the information. It can happen while we're trying to store the information, and it can happen while we're trying to retrieve the information. Wherever the interference occurred, and whether it's external or internal, it can cause a side effect which leads to us forgetting something we're trying to remember. Moreover, we have the information storage failure. You met someone and you got their name, but guess what? You failed to store the information. You're listening to your teacher in class and you're trying to understand, but guess what? You failed to store the information properly. And then in the future, when you're going to try to retrieve the information, you are going to fail in the process of retrieval. And lastly, we have the motivated forgetting, which is a theorized psychological behavior or action where people forget any unwanted memories or experiences, whether it's on a conscious or unconscious level. We are basically unfolding the scenario of repression of those memories, forcing ourselves to forget about them. And by default, in the future, we won't be able to retrieve the information, and therefore we will forget the information. So where do we go from here? While forgetting is not something that we can avoid per se, once we start to understand the reasons behind why we forget, this can become really useful because we can avoid the source of the problem. And when we do, we create a solution by default. We may forget, as we said, for many different reasons. In a lot of cases, there are a number of factors mixed together that causes this influence and this interference. And at the end of the day, we will struggle to recall the information, experiences, and knowledge that we try to acquire, store, and eventually recall. So once we understand these factors, we can put an end to forgetting, because it will make it easier for us to put these memory improvement strategies into practice. And what I mean by implementing and putting in action those memory improvement strategies is that once we identify the main sources of retrieval failure in our memory system, whether it's failure to store the information, whether it's any kind of external or internal interference, whether it's motivated forgetting, or whether it was just the main basic problem in the acquisition of the information, once we identify the issue, you'll be able in the future to avoid the problem.